Education Conference follow-up webinars. I'll give you a little bit of background on Foundations, Inc. We are a national education nonprofit. We're located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, and our mission is to improve the quality of education by building the skills of educators. So we work across the school day. We work with after-school programs, schools, districts, and even at the state level in order to create a brighter future for every child. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about Foundations, Inc., we'll make sure that we put our website in the chat for you. Take a minute to follow us on social media. And you may already know us from our signature professional learning experience, the Beyond School Hours Conference. We host our conference annually. It's in February each year. And in 2023, we will be back in Orlando, Florida. We're so excited, at the Rosen Center Hotel from February 9th through the 12th. And we would love for you all to join us. So stay tuned because registration will be opening soon. But today we are so excited to have with us Jodi Grant, who's the Executive Director of the Afterschool Alliance. And joining Jodi today, it's going to be a panel of passionate professionals who represent really a cross-section of roles in the field. They were chosen by lottery to participate in this unscripted conversation. And it's always, the conversation with Jodi Grant is always one of the favorites at the Beyond School Hours Conference. So we're so glad that Jodi could be with us virtually. So thanks, Jodi. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. And for those of you that came on a little early, I'm wearing my baseball jersey because it's my daughter's birthday. We're going to a game today. And one of the things that always comes up for those of us that are baseball fans is the question, and feel free to put this in the chat, what would your walk-up song be? So for those of you that don't watch baseball, it's every batter when they come to the plate, they have a song. And so mine would be This Is Me from Greatest American Showman. I love the whole, all the language. If you watch the movie, the whole theory behind the song. So that's what you heard. But I wanted to thank all of you and let you know, for those of you that are joining as panelists, you're not really a panelist. This is a conversation. And this is really, I want to thank you because this is my chance to talk to the superstars that you all are about the challenges that you're facing in the field, the successes that you're seeing, and how it can help influence what we do here in Washington, D.C. with public policy. And so, to get started, just a little bit about what I'm seeing, and then really I would love all of our panelists to introduce themselves, tell me where you're from. But sitting in Washington right now, I think we're focused very, very much so on what is happening with the COVID relief dollars out there. And are after-school programs able to tap into them? And if so, what for? So I think it depends state by state at some of the state level dollars, but we're really focused now on local school districts. Are they partnering with after-school to provide holistic supports for kids? Are they just doing tutoring and summer school and calling it after school? Are you at the table to discuss how some of these funds are being used? In the surveys we've done in the field, we're hearing far too few after-school programs are actually tapping into these funds. The ones that are doing much better with being able to pay staff more and do recruitment and retention. That's another big thing we're hearing about. Recruitment, retention of staff is a huge issue right now. I think just burnout is a huge issue because people have done so much. You should know that in addition to the COVID dollars, we are always looking to get more federal and state dollars into your programs. And I am testifying tomorrow before the House Appropriations Committee, asking them for another $500 million to support after school. I am a firm believer, and I want to hear this from all of you, but that if we get money directly for after school programs, that puts us in a much stronger position than having to go beg school districts for money to support the services that we provide to kids. So I'll be making that pitch. And so I think on that note, I really do want this to be a conversation. I have questions for all of you, but I would love particularly those of you that have agreed to be panelists, and I thank you. If you can tell me who you are, where you're from, and maybe one of the things you're proudest about in the work that you're doing in after school.
Susie, do you want to start? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can go first. So I'm Susie Estrada. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here with Campfire National. So we have councils all throughout the US, from out of school time programs to day camps and then residential camps. I work remotely. I'm based in Salt Lake City, Utah. And one of the things that I'm proudest of is, let's see, the different organizations that I collaborate with. So being involved in different committees and being able to advocate for after school. And then right now at the end of the year, we're having a lot of celebrations. So seeing it come full circle is something that I'm really proud of.
Thank you. How about Adina?
Hello, everyone. Dina Linker from Chicago. Pronouns are she, they. Our organization, CIS, Communities in Schools, is one in Chicago, is one of 173 affiliates around the country that provide wraparound services to students. So while we're closing up the files on the programming that we do tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 in the schools, we're starting to organize summer programming, especially in schools that will be hosting summer school. And one of the things that I'm excited about is the tenacity that I have seen in the educators that I have been working with, their capacity to continue to show up dedicated, even though drained under the circumstances. And welcome to be here.
And David, if you want to, I don't know if you can turn on your camera or unmute, share a little bit about yourself.
Yes, hi. I'm actually driving. I'll be back at my office like 5 minutes. Do you mind if I jump back on to introduce myself?
No, of course not. Please drive safely.
Yeah, my drop off was later today, so I'll be listening. I'll jump back on. Thanks.
I actually want to just jump in on something Adina just said, because I think it's huge, which is the tenacity and resilience of our field. It's something I'm ridiculously proud of. It's from the day one of COVID, after school providers like jumped to the rescue, making sure kids were okay, making sure families were okay, doing online visits, doing porch visits, doing all day virtual programming, taking care of the children of essential workers, creating after school hubs. And I want you all to know that because of that, in the last COVID bill, we were able to explicitly get after school mentioned, both as a use of the state education dollars and local education dollars as a proven way to help kids recover. And that is because the work has been noticed. So I do think that, one of the extraordinary things has been, I think parents and definitely policymakers have really become aware of the difference our field makes. And I want to thank you all for all that, because I know that people have done that while facing their own challenges. And we've been fighting, every step of the way to make sure that there's funding for all of that. But this is so much bigger than funding. It, comes to, from day one, after school put kids and families first in this pandemic. And schools were shutting left and right, and after school programs are figuring out how to be open and how to welcome kids in. So I thank you. Ethan, do you want to introduce yourself? Maybe not. All right. Well, I have. To Susie and Adina, is there anything you want to bring up? I mean, I can ask you a bunch of questions, but from where you're sitting, national perspectives that you want to hear, that you'd like to see more attention on, challenges you're facing.
Yeah, I would say to build on the momentum that we currently have as far as recognition and acknowledgement for the field. So one of the committees that I'd sit on is with Utah State Board, the Access Committee. So we work on equity, and we just provide like feedback. We don't actually make any choices or decisions or anything like that. But listening to one of the board meetings talking about our after school network and the people that advocate for after school in Utah, a lot of people didn't know who the organization was. And then when it came to funding, the alignment of, do we want to fund someone that doesn't align with Utah values? whatever that means. But just building on that momentum of like, no, like, you can't block funding based on, personal values. Utah values are diverse and they're wide, and people feel differently about a lot of different things, right? So just building on that recognition of, no, this is an essential like branch of education. We meet a need, and we are key. Even with like COVID, teachers receive stipends that they substituted to help cover COVID, like quarantine and stuff. But I know a lot of people on my team, when I was directing a program, it was school-based, and it was my team that were jumping in to fill in recess duty, kitchen, classroom, but they didn't receive any recognition, any stipend, or any incentive for that, which they didn't ask for, but we give it to the other people that we see as professionals. So why not after school professionals?
I'm trying to grapple with your question, Jodi, because I think the biggest thing that I'm thinking of is, and unfortunately, my city's probably been in your news because of some of the environmental and community violence that our young people are exposed to. And I was just in a session this morning with our Lieutenant Governor and many of the community that are in healing informed spaces. And I would love to talk about or learn more about what can be done to connect healing and centered resources with after school organizations. Because we know the data between 3 and 6 p.m. and we can look at all of the deficit language, but we know when we give children opportunities to do things that are exciting and give them agency, that's also a healing space. So that's just, after yesterday's events and what goes on in my city on a daily basis, that's sort of where my mind is today.
Right. So I think that 3 big things from both of you. And please, everybody who's part of this too, feel free to weigh in on the chat. I'm gonna take them in order, just because I think they are really big. I think the first thing that Susie, you brought up, which I know Communities in Schools is dealing with too, is you called it Utah values, but I think a challenge to our field around, and it's much more in school than out of school, but on curriculum and this tension between making sure that we are always a place where all kids feel safe physically and emotionally, and some of the culture wars that are going on and how it impacts after school. And I did a whole session on this. And I can tell you that I think in some parts of the country, this is a non-issue. And in some parts of the country, and I'm aware of some of what's going on in Utah, it's a huge issue. And the programs that, at least in our space, that have been most successful are the ones that show rather than tell. So, I was talking to some people from Fairbanks, Alaska, where this has been a huge, huge issue. And they found that, if they used the term social emotional learning, there was red flags went off. If they invited parents to a school production that the kids were all collaborating on, they wanted their kids to be part of it. So the more they explained and showed what they were doing, as opposed to using acronyms, that was better. But I think this is going to be something that we're still navigating as a field. I know I've talked to Castle about social emotional learning, and it's the emotional language that scares people the most. That said, the Afterschool Alliance, and this on our website, we just put out a report in April about healthy supports for students. And Adina, this gets a little bit to what you're talking about. And I did 17 radio shows, and most of them were conservative radio. And when I talked about coming out of the pandemic, the fact that, we have to focus on more than academic losses, and that our kids need to be safe. They need to feel safe. They need to have healthy relationships with other kids. They need to have healthy relationships with mentors. They need to focus on resilience. And I was doing that with 4-H, who has a whole, sharing their curriculum. I didn't get any challenges to that. So I think very much so, and this is jumping into the trauma-informed care piece. I think that recent reports from the Surgeon General, CDC, which has, when you talk about this was an issue before, but like rates of youth self-reporting anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, like this is a major crisis. And I think we can and should talk about trauma-informed care, which is, related to, but separate to the whole youth violence piece. But I think these are very much issues that are on the national agenda. And I don't know, before I move on to kind of the treating our workforce the way they ought to be treated, I didn't know if anybody else, if you guys wanted to add anything back, because I really do want this to be kind of a conversation or thoughts on anything I just said. And it looks like David's joined us now in person.
Yes, hi. Should I do a 30-second intro real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you guys are an amazing organization. I've been following you for years. I'm focused specifically on training and certifying after-school site staff to launch and support makerspaces at their sites. And you can think of it somewhat as a lifeguard at one point, at one end of the spectrum versus a teacher, right? And I partnered with California Community Colleges, so we have a certification. And the DOD, when I told them about this, asked me to put together a proposal for them to fund some pilots where we would go in and do this for free to the sites. And what I'm looking for is just indications of interest from all the, from the tens of thousands of, in California, we have 4,000 sites. So anyway, I put my information in the chat, and, I've just begun to outreach right now to get that support.
That's awesome. And Susie mentioned earlier the state network, so I assume you're working with Jeff and Heather, and and if you're not, we need to make that happen.
No, I have, and I'm actually talking to Michael also.
Oh, Michael Funk, yeah.
And on a very personal note, this was all inspired by, and I don't know if everyone's going to know this name, but Mary Jo Ginty. And so I met her right before, and she was very instrumental in shaping and inspiring me, because I was doing it as a volunteer basis, going in, literally doing the sites. Anyway, so I know you had written a very nice.
Yes,
anyway, enough about
he is sorely missed.
Yeah.
Mary Jo, for those of you that are not from California, is an icon in after school in the land of California, and really California, given the state investments, is really a model for all the rest of us. I mean, state investments in California are going to make our federal investments look really tiny.
Let's hope. Let's hope that that's all. Yeah. So thank you. I'll be glad.
All right, well, I was going to and I have questions for all of you after this, but I did want to address the second thing, Susie, that you brought up, and stop me if I haven't been addressing all of these things, but which is that far too often, I think our field, like, people think after school is great, but they don't realize what a necessity it is. And as a result, our work and our staff are undervalued. And I think one of, our priorities, particularly with these COVID dollars that are out there, is we can use them to pay staff more, to provide more benefits to staff, to do professional development. And I think you're absolutely right. This is kind of a wake-up call, because we knew before the pandemic that we have extraordinary people working with kids, but that they're not well paid and they often don't have access to benefits. And now more than ever, we need to come back and make sure that they're treated as professionals that they are and get the support that they need. And I think it's actually another thing that we're very much kind of struggling with and thinking about at the national level, because I always see after school as having different tiers, right? Like the people where this is a career and a profession and it needs to be treated as such. And then I think there's also room at the line staff level to bring in, like looking at like AmeriCorps. You could do AmeriCorps part-time while you're getting a college degree or a CTE degree, get money towards your education and come through for a couple of years and then either decide to stay or move on with that experience. It can often be like if somebody's studying to be a therapist or a teacher, you could be doing some of your classroom work in the after school classroom. So trying to figure out how we think about our field in a much broader sense and with that longevity of, absolutely that this is a profession that people can make their life's work. And Susie, why don't you answer first? Then David, we'll take you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, if from my experience, a challenge with even like the COVID dollars is if your funding is tied or supervised by someone else that's not directly after school, sometimes the priorities are placed somewhere else. And so after school, even if a portion of the money is written in for after school, if you don't see the grant and you don't know exactly what, then you can't budget and plan. And then also, not that something's being done that isn't supposed to be done, but it just, the COVID money is prioritized in other ways. Like let's place it in, I don't know, let's place it over here on just like COVID materials rather than paying people more, which is one of the things that happened in my experience at a school-based site, not because of malintentions. It's just unless you're in after school and in these conversations, I think it's really difficult to understand the budgetary needs. So I think on a national level, just establishing like even direct service staff, the minimum should be this based on like your state. I was gonna say the state minimum wage, but then I realized it's so low across so many people, so many states that might not matter. So just having like a national, like this is what a direct service staff should be paid like straight out of high school or however young you can hire. Because people will find loopholes, I think, even with COVID funding, if it's not the after school director that's directly in charge of paying, let's bump their pay.
Well, yeah, and I think, right, there's two issues there. One is more autonomy and more money going directly to the after-school program so that then you can come, if you're partnering with the school, with your own resources. But then the second piece, yeah, it's challenging because I think even the COVID fund, I live in DC, and I think it allows you to bump up salaries to $14 or $15 an hour. Minimum wage in DC is higher than that. I think California is higher than that too. And minimum wage in DC is probably still not a living wage. So you really need to think about, where our staff is living and making sure that they have, right, like that living wage. David?
So I wanted to ask the group a question to get their feedback or their thoughts on this. I've seen in my limited interactions, I mean, a lot for me, but limited nationally, a very strong unofficial resistance to professional developer training or certifying of the site staff for the reason, this is the unofficial part, that they will then quit their job to go get a better job somewhere else. So that's not, I'm not saying that's been officially presented but it's just something I'm wondering if it's just me maybe that, because I'm in a situation where I'm providing to them free. So there's no cost consideration in terms of resistance. Anyway, I know you're smiling. I know it's a controversial issue. I know it's real.
No, I was smiling because I saw Adina go like this, and I was thinking, like, speak up, tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, I'm just kind of putting it out there. So in terms of the resistance that we can, not only do we have an issue, and in California we have this of the money going to the day school. That's, I don't think but what I've been hearing from the group there at CAN and at the state. So that's still a fight of officially where it can go.
It's a huge issue, like nationally, that most school districts are keeping the funds within the school walls and within the school staff, which is, and I think if there's anything we learned from COVID, it's that learning occurs outside walls with educators that aren't necessarily teachers as well. And that those people rose to the occasion during the pandemic and absolutely need to be, I think we need to be treating this as a much larger learning ecosystem for our kids, with each of these pieces being equally important and different. And we definitely don't want after school to feel like school, but we want after school providers to have, and we're losing teachers left and right too, but
a lot.
to have the support they need so that they can stay in this field and keep doing the things they're doing.
Right. And everything I'm going to say to you comes from everything you guys have done in the field. I mean, I've just the last 3 years in reading, so don't take this as my insights directly. But the fact is that the after school opportunity to do more than the day program. I mean, we're in this transition now. There's a lot of great schools that do career to, technical education. All it's happening, but by the numbers, it's not happening, right? We can all point out schools that are doing CTE. My son is a sophomore taking a community college screenwriting class. Okay, that's fantastic. But I just wanted to reinforce what you were saying. But more importantly, back to this resistance, we won't see it because it's unofficial. The gap, and again, this comes from you guys, the industry, the resistance or looking down upon of the after school site staff from the day programs or administration, again, on a site by site, it may not exist, but overall. And so it's a huge fight. And I don't know if we call it out that, I don't know, because it's all this money's coming in, and this is the opportunity. I'll make statements and I can die, in the whole process, fall on the sword, but to make this point, because the day programs, don't even acknowledge really the after school site staff, much less put money toward, like if you put them all together, and I'll shut up here in a second. If you had a vote, right, if every school, every district, every school got money, and you took all the staff day and after school, and then, okay, let's vote on where the money goes. I'd love to hear what people think, where they think that money's going to go. Is it going to go appropriately to the after, anyway, I'm not saying anything people don't know, but, we're all in our individual advocacy spots, right, in our local markets.
So we did have a comment in the chat about the similar experiences with COVID funding. And Teresa said that they have partnerships with their district, but they're not willing to share. And I know, Adina, you had a comment that you wanted to make as well.
I just wanted to chime in on some of what David was sharing. I think one of the things that we notice, obviously CIS does a lot of work with community partners, and because their staff turns over is very transient, they're reluctant to invest. But as David was saying, we want the support folks, the caregivers, the educators that are outside of the classroom to have some of the same understanding about how pedagogy operates, and how you can take what might be an expertise in arts or in theater and infuse learning practices into it. So yeah, right, Jodi, we don't want it to be like school, but we don't want it to be entertainment either. We want there to be some skill building along the way. And I do think that takes helping folks that are new to the out of school space understand that there are some practices that need to be included in their engagement with young people. That comes through professional development, and it may entice them to stay in the field and develop those skills long term.
But I just want to say, amen. I hear all of this, and I think that at least nationally, we hear you loud and clear. I think this is something, and some of the we have some sister organizations and brother organizations that focus particularly on the professional development, including foundations. And I think that one of the things for me as a national advocate is it keeps coming back to this idea that we really need to create funding for and directly to the CBOs, the FBOs, the after school providers, and we need to really start thinking, and I think there's a lot of energy around this, about learning ecosystems, of which the school is a part, but it is not the only part. And looking for ways, one of the things I'm working on is credit for learning in after school. Because, if you're doing a Shakespeare production, that might be worth an English credit. If you're doing, you're talking about makerspace, so many of the things that kids are doing, CTE, jobs, apprenticeships, and starting to really change that. But it's really hard to do that when a school district has all the money. And at least in our surveys, and I encourage you all to fill them out, what we're finding is that in most places, and there's exceptions, and we are broadcasting these exceptions. We have a map on our webpage of broadcasting all of these exceptions. The money is not going to partners. And I firmly believe, and I know I'm preaching to the choir again, that in the places where the money is truly going to partners, we're going to have more success. because we're going to have a much more holistic approach. So, we're going to come out of this 3 years from now and be able to point to those successes. The problem is, how many kids are we not reaching during those 3 years that could really use our support? Susie, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so two things have come up for me listening to everyone. I don't know which one I want to say first. So I'll start with staffing. So not wanting to like invest in people because they're transient or whatever, the millions of reasons that people have to not bump that pay. So one of my colleagues, Tori Smith, works with Promise South Salt Lake, brought up an excellent point that we continue to recruit high school students and college students that might not be fully invested in the field. And while we can get them invested, especially if they want to go into education, that's definitely how I became involved in after school, was fresh out of high school as a volunteer. But we're missing so many other populations. So like people who are in like women's shelters and things like that, or like halfway houses, people with real life experience that can relate to our kids on a different level. And then paying them a livable wage so we can also break that cycle of poverty. But then also have people that can talk to kids about these are the choices that I made in my life. This is where it got me. And so like that extra layer of prevention. I have not struggled with addiction. I can go and tell, all my kids don't do drugs, but I can't relate to them the same way that someone else who has struggled with addiction would, right? And that's just so meaningful. And then the second thing that I wanted to say is relates back to funding. So part of what I heard yesterday after the mass shooting in Texas is, of course, let's make these physical spaces safer, only one like point of entry and things like that. When we're talking about youth programs, schools, but especially like youth programs, we don't have the funding to even pay a livable wage, to get materials. How are we supposed to create these safe spaces? Those were the physically safe spaces. Those are the things that kept me up at night, as far as we don't have like a alarm system that works consistently. There's multiple entries. It's just that physical space, right? So it's just that added layer of, also we focus a lot on like mental health and emotional safety, which is important. But I think, and I speak because my niece shared some things with me that she's going through. She's a college student right now. She's finishing her associates. But just like the mental warfare of seeing people that look like you constantly being shot on TV, and their face is constantly on the news, whether it's mass shootings or police brutality. That's what they're seeing more often than not. So for children that have been through COVID, that have been seeing a lot more police brutality on the news and now mass shootings, how can we also, because if we don't want to talk about gun policy, we want to talk about, let's make the schools safer and programs safer. For after school, we don't have the funding for materials. How do we create a safe space without that funding, right? I think is the additional layer that for me is coming up as things continue to happen.
So, yeah, I think, and this, I mean, talking about violence, I think, Adina, what you wrote in the chat is probably where our role in after school comes to this, right? There's there's evidence, and we just worked with Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, like considerable evidence that if we can reach kids and give them a place where they feel like they can be themselves and they belong and that people care about them, that significantly reduces violence against kids and by kids. And on top of that, I think there's some really amazing programs out there that I've seen that are alternatives to incarceration, because so many of our kids that do get into trouble, it's because they've made bad choices. And maybe, I actually did this before when I was back in law school. I worked with incarcerated youth, and, over 3/4 of incarcerated youth have learning disabilities. And so they get frustrated in school, they act out, and then you're right on this pipeline, right, to incarceration, which means, it costs huge amounts of money, and what a loss for the kids and for society. But of course, that's only a piece of it. I think, I am definitely not an expert on the making a place physically safe. I think it's and I kind of would say I defer to each community, because I've also heard that many kids, if you start putting cops and barriers and walls, they feel less safe, not more safe.
Yes,
I,
sorry, Jodi. I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to clarify that's not what I meant. I don't believe that we should have school resource officers in schools. That's not a proven effective way, especially for youth of color. So rephrasing my question, how do we then shift the narrative of, because we do have people that don't want cell and don't want the emotional space, and God forbid you introduce yourself with pronouns. They don't want all these things. So how do we shift the conversation from, you're telling me to invest in physical safety, but I can't invest in the physical safety because I can't even invest in like these other things, right? Again, just basic materials for kids. A huge part of my program was donations.
Yeah, no, I think that's some of the work we have cut out for us. I do think that there's definitely, bipartisan support at the federal level for dealing with some of the mental health challenges we're facing, which is not, I mean, we're talking about something much bigger than that, and all the trauma and, where our society is. I think, and I think, that comes back, where all of this intersects. Like if you're looking at, what are Utah values, and I don't know who's making that up or whose Utah values, because I think, there's different places with different ideas, but do those values come to a point where it makes an individual child not feel like they belong or not feel safe, right? And that can't, our place, our work has to be a place where every kid feels like they're safe and they belong, no matter what the reason, right? Whether it's economics, whether it's zip code, whether it's race, whether it's, sexual orientation, right? We want our places to be the place where, kids feel safe. I think that's a challenge. Like I don't know what the answer is. I'm looking to, people on the ground to show us what's worked for them so that we can share those practices. I'd also say, the voice that is very much missing from our conversation right now, but which is super important, is the kids themselves.
Mhm.
I think they have, we've been doing a lot of work with youth voices, youth advocates, youth ambassadors to try and hear what they think would make things better. And I think sometimes the kids have the best ideas of all. So.
Well, they do have the best ideas. I would even say, right? Because the customer always does. Can I say one real quick thing? I wanted to jump on to what Susie, you're amazing. In terms of in LA, all of the site staff come from the neighborhoods, and that's a tremendous asset. And they're not going to move away. If they do move away, they're going to come back. And I just got so, that's how I got hooked into all of this when I realized, oh, the staff is not only amazing, they care about the kids, they may be related to the kids, so on and so forth. So the fact that we as a society let them drift off for all the reasons we can point to is such a loss, right? And it's kind of like preventive health care. If you spend money, anyway, we all know this. So military spouses, because I've worked with training in the military, veterans for 3D printing and things like that, post-service, I have this concept or an idea I'm pursuing of military spouses. About 80% are women, if not a little more, and they don't have jobs because they get discriminated against because they're moving a lot, right? So it's very difficult. So that's something I was going to eventually bring to the group. I just am in the beginning of kind of bringing them together, but that's just one population, right? I just bring up an idea. So the populations of those in rehab, those, and also recidivism. I mean, the prison population is a huge resource. Of course, they're from the local community. Because anyway, I just throw these ideas out there.
And I think that's right. And Susie, you brought up a great point too. I think what makes a lot of after school programs fabulous is that it's recruiting people from the community, and to do more of that and proactively. Like obviously, I think a lot of programs use paraprofessionals from the community. I've seen quite a few really outstanding programs that are based in public housing, and particularly with immigrant the immigrant populations in that community, having people that speak the language, know the culture, where the kids can really identify. And in many cases, we're also the bridge between the kids and the parents. So where the parents can identify and feel comfortable, communicating with the after school staff. So I think that's right. And we need to look to our whole community. I also know during COVID in particular, we had a couple of programs where parents lost their job and the after school program started employing the parents, which was a win-win because they knew their kids were safe and they suddenly had, jobs that were paying. David, you're on mute.
I'll try to make this quick. I don't know the makeup, but in LA, it's 60-70% low income. It's going to be Latino heavy and African American. And in terms of after school, it's even higher, right? So my son went to a 90% Title I, and that's what I really learned about this 8 and after school program. So the point is, I'm reaffirming what you're saying. The parent there'll be lead parents that will then give trust to the other parents. And we all know that the link, the work of the parents being involved is critical, especially in immigrant communities. And this is just basic blocking and tackling. No one historically has done it. It's not anybody's bad, right? It's not criticizing the administrators, criticizing the teachers. It's just the after school program is an amazing resource to do that without just hiring one. I mean, if they just hired one parent, that's a lot of times going to bring in a lot of the other parents. And then all of a sudden, it bleeds back into the day school, the various support issues. I get excited here, projects. I just want to say, doing the local and then reaching out to the parents and then somehow educating the funders that it's okay that they're not a paraprofessional per se, right? That's, again, please feel free to comment, but I mean, anybody who's done after school, it's not about a curriculum mastery, right?
Well, and that's a whole nother issue too, which is how do we measure the success of after school programs?
Yeah.
And we want to be measuring all the things we're talking about, right? Which is a lot of, very important skills, but they don't necessarily show up in an exam, or, an academic piece, but are, truly essential for our kids, our families, and, and our future. So Gina, you keep putting all these awesome things in the chat, and I'm like going back and forth and going, just speak up. So I'm going to call on you.
I just want to change directions ever so slightly. We just wrapped up a project here in Chicago where we connected high school students to Apple experts and local digital production teams, and they took smartphones out into the community in order to tell the story that countered the myth around learning loss, and then presented short films that told their story. And I think one of the beautiful things about that, and we talking a little bit about funding, and Susie was talking about not having control over the budget, we wrote into this proposal that the young people would be compensated for their labor. And the level of participation and commitment to the final piece, both by the production team that we're working with the young people and our high school students that participated, was untrackable, really, because it wasn't just, I'm coming here to work with people, and this is a no-cost program. It doesn't cost me anything. It's my voice and my time is valuable enough that they're compensating me. We ultimately showed those films at the Gene Siskel Film Center on State Street in downtown Chicago, got good local press for them. And one of the young men that was interviewed afterward was at a predominantly a minority majority school, and said, after school programming at my school is athletics. We want programming that helps us use our brains. And I think that's when we take that student voice, we value it, and we see how deep they're willing to go into work that they're offered an opportunity to do. They'll just continue to blow your mind. You'll just hear and see things you couldn't possibly have expected.
So first of all, I would love to have one of the kids or you write a blog that we could showcase, if it's highlights, if it's actually YouTube, showcase this nationally, because I think that's extraordinary and absolutely want to elevate youth voice. I think Chicago has sort of been the model for the nation, thanks to After School Matters, of the fact that particularly for our older youth, we should be paying them for the work they're doing, and it's something that we do with our youth ambassadors. And I think it's and they should be getting, and it flips, like some of the work they do where they get paid should be credit worthy too. Like you can't, just because you're getting paid doesn't mean it's not learning, and shouldn't be treated as
Part of
learning.
our argument as to why they should be compensated was, if we're going to use these films to demonstrate the validity of our work, then we're actually in the end making money off of their time. So let's be sure to recognize and be equitable about how we include not only just their voice, but acknowledge the work that went into getting that piece that I can then show to a funder, that I can show to the district.
I think, right. I mean, I think that's great to like actually show the value. And, we know for so many of our older kids, like they need to have jobs. And one of the sad things I heard, during COVID was some of the kids, when after school programs were checking on them, like if they had a job in a grocery store and everybody else in the family was suddenly unemployed, like that kid was working more hours in the grocery store. And so how do we make sure that, our kids that we can not only have high quality after school programs for older youth, but also that we make it financially feasible for them to attend when they need to be earning money. So other thoughts? We have about 12 minutes left, and I haven't been following the chat that closely. So Elizabeth and Paula, if there's something that you want to elevate from the chat, please go ahead. All right, well, I will say, first of all, I just want to thank you, because I think, it's really great for me sitting in Washington, I hear things from our surveys. I try to have eyes and ears on the ground, but, for everybody on here, please flag us with both the best practices and the biggest challenges, because, my job is really to help programs on the ground and to make sure that they're getting the resources and the attention that they need at the national level, which of course is easier said than done. But it's also the reason I get up in the morning, because, I really want to truly believe that we're helping make a difference, and that's by supporting all of you. So it's really imperative that we hear how we can best support you and what we're doing that's helpful and what we're doing if it's not helpful.
Yeah, and Jodi, I've been furiously taking notes. So one of the things that this has really done for us, our organization is a capacity building organization. Professional learning is our thing. And I have a list now of things that we need to showcase at the conference. We need to make sure there are resources, staff retention and recruitment, professionalization of the field. How are we dealing with staff burnout? Healing-centered resources. I think this has really been a fruitful conversation, because it really has highlighted the needs of the field, so that providers like us can better serve the field as well.
And I would say, and the measurement piece and all of that too is really important, because that's another thing that we're working on right now. We're really disappointed, especially when you're looking at some of the COVID dollars that, coming out of the department, the measurements are far too academic and not holistic enough, and really trying to see what we need to do to change that, because unfortunately, particularly if 80% of the dollars are going to school districts and they're being tasked with, and I loved what you said too about learning loss, because there may have been some academic learning loss, but there's also all these other experiences where kids were learning and growing and showing resilience. And so how do we try to capture that in a way that will drive both public dollars but also philanthropic dollars to programs and to the need for professional development in all of these areas?
Yeah, and I don't know if Adina or Susie have any sort of final thoughts you want to share, or again, is there sort of a
Before you go, I'm going to answer the question that just came up in the chat, and then
okay.
which was so on the ESSER dollars. And I try not to use that because like you guys may know what it is, but I think most people are like, huh, ESSER, but on all the federal COVID dollars. So if you look at, there were multiple pieces of legislation that were out there. And the big one is the most recent one that gave the money to education. The education dollars that we're talking about, and those are not the only dollars we can tap into, but 20% went to state education agencies and 80% went to local education agencies. And in the state education agencies, there was a specific set aside that 1% had to go to after school, and it was enrichment, not academics, and 1% had to go to summer learning. And I can tell you, and we have all of this on our website, which is right behind my head. But it varies state to state. So we have some states that literally worked with after school networks to try to get that money to, I mean, there's plenty of poverty that's not in Title I schools. So to try and reach pockets or programs that might not have been recognized otherwise. And then we had states, big states like New York, where they just said, we're just going to give this all to Title I schools. So they'll get 100% of the state dollars. And some of those dollars that explicitly were meant for summer learning or after school are being used for summer school or tutoring. And some of them are being used for what we would see as, comprehensive enrichment and literally, the way it was intended. And so it's something where, if you go onto our website, we have a map that does that. And then of the 80% of those dollars, right? So that's 30 billion in all, $22 billion that went to local school districts. We have been surveying the field, and I think in most cases, the reality is after school programs are not at the table. Parents are not at the table. Kids are not at the table when they're deciding how to use these funds. I think it's about 20% of the programs in our survey have actually gotten these funds, and about 50% have asked for them. And we are trying very hard, but we're national, to empower local communities with data and arguments to tap into those funds. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we go back to Congress and the White House and the Department of Ed and say, these partnerships aren't all happening. And that's because you're giving money to school districts. And you've got to, when we think about the future and funding sources, make sure that we're not setting it up for after school programs to be begging for dollars. And they're seen instead as true partners in our child's learning. So I think that's the answer. And we definitely have best practices because we are trying as hard as possible to share, and we're working, we have allies with principals, we have allies with superintendents. I can tell you the U.S. Department of Ed truly wants this to happen, but it's, the rubber hits the road at the local level. And, when those school districts are deciding, what they have the power to do.
Yeah, lots of agreement in the chat.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, I just want to thank everybody for their time. If we wanted to do a round of sort of final thoughts, how about we start? Adina, you want to start?
Sure. I would simply argue that because we know that we're not going to go back to the normal of the pre-pandemic, to have your team think out of the box. Think about ways that don't necessarily lean on the traditional design of programming or even approach to other network and community partners. Really think out of the box, because if everyone does that, we can disrupt some of the status quo about how programming is seen, how staff is recruited. To David's point, we can engage communities and parents and get some of that local cultural capital infused into our programming. But it's gonna start with us not attempting to take the model or the checklist from before and replicate it. We really need to take advantage of the disruption from the pandemic to revolutionize some of the spaces we work in.
So true. David, how about you?
To build on that, I was thinking about the DOE and also the local, how to influence that. And one area is the the boards are usually political, or they're political type people. And there's a whole network of political consultants that do this, right? That go around the country and support candidates. I'm not saying it's easy for us, but it's an area that's probably been untapped. And there are people like everybody else, but they have undue influence because over their career, they work for all these politicians. So each local level, whether it's Chicago or LA or any city, you can tap in. It's kind of if you go straight at the education ecosystem, it's a huge group of people, right? But the number of people who actually are involved in politics. Now, the downside again is it's messy, right? And so I thought this group could maybe start an informal support group. Like I know a lot of people in Chicago. I come out of Chicago. I'm from Milwaukee. I did politics in Chicago. I'm going to email her after this call. But that would maybe just a little small thing of those who are interested that we can help each other with this idea.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Susie, how about you? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think our normal was never sustainable or healthy. So I think we're in a great spot right now, as turbulent as it might feel, to be able to advocate and really make some changes that are going to get us where we need to be as a profession, for ourselves, for the families, for youth. So as daunting as it may seem, we're in a really sweet spot right now.
And Jodi.
So I just like so after school that you all end this on the possibilities of what we can do for our kids and our families and our communities. And I thank you for that. And I thank you for taking this hour of your time to talk. And I think you guys, I mean, I could just shut up and listen to you because it's so much wisdom coming out of the three of you and the chat room. And again, it makes me really proud to do what I do. So please don't be a stranger. Now you all know me. And let's reinvent the world. Like, let's take the best of what we learned during the pandemic. And I love that. Like, like we're always encouraging our kids to get out of their comfort zones, to think, differently, to figure out, we're definitely trying to do that at the national level, all of the different partnerships and actors we can bring into our space to support our kids and to do things differently and better. And on that last note, with the kids' blessing and their vision as part of it all.
Well, thank you, Jodi, and thank you, Adina and Susie and David, for being our panelists. You guys were brave, and it was such an amazing conversation. And Jodi will be back. We're going to do another one of these in July. I believe it's July 27th. And we are doing this webinar series weekly. So please join us Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. For an hour of professional development, and it's free. Tell your friends. The other thing we would love to do is see you at the Beyond School Hours Conference. Our theme this year is transformation. It starts with us. And I feel like this conversation was like the first step in the right direction. So we'll be in Orlando February 9th through the 12th, and the registration will be opening soon. So thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate you, and have a wonderful rest of the week. And enjoy your Memorial Day weekend, please.
Yep.
Thank